Well, welcome everyone who is joining us for our great conversation this evening. I'm going to give us just a couple of minutes to get settled in, and then we will get started with our conversation. We're so glad you're here. All right. Always a teacher like to give decent wait time. But if you are just joining us, please let us know your name and tell us a little bit about how you're connected to tonight's conversation. Again, we really want to make tonight a conversation. So as you're joining us, if you see something or you want to leave us a question or say hi to one of our panelists, please join us and join us in the chat, and we will make sure that we have this be an engaging conversation. So welcome to our third Teacher Talk. We're doing it on Thursday instead of Teacher Talk Tuesday this week. I am Sarah Marshall, and I serve as the Executive Director for Teach Indy. And we're just excited to have you this evening. We really, again, want this session to be interactive, so please make sure you're dropping your questions throughout. So if we can pull up those slides, I'd love to tell you just a little bit about Teach Indy. So Teach Indy is an education nonprofit here in Indianapolis. And really our mission is to recruit, develop, recognize, and support with the retention of high quality teachers here in Indianapolis. We also love to have conversations that get teachers having, just talking and sharing their knowledge with others, because it's so critical that we open up the dialogue and let teachers lead in the most powerful of ways. So tonight, we're really excited to be jumping in with a couple of great panelists who I'm going to get to share the airspace with today. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we'll dive into our discussion. So Chrissy, I'll turn things over to you.
Great. Hi, I'm Chrissy Franz. I'm the Director of Literacy at Donnan Elementary and Middle School with Adelante Schools. And I've been in education for 18 years, with 15 of those years in kindergarten through second grade and special education.
Good evening, everyone. I am Lydia Glover. I currently work at Allegiant Prep Academy as their lead third grade teacher. I spent 3 years in the K-2 realm, being a kindergarten teacher for 2 years and then a first grade teacher for 1.
Hi, I'm Tina Cowan, and I am a literacy specialist at Adelante Schools, and I have been doing this work for 19 years. And about 11 or 12 of those have been in the K2, K3 space.
Well, thank you, all three of you, for being here today. I just want to shout you out for a second. You guys have quite the fan club. So shout out to the Austin and Madonna team. And then something that I absolutely love is, yep, that's my daughter. So shout out to Lydia's mom, who's joining us this evening. And again, for those of you that are joining, please feel free to engage with us. Leave us some questions. If there's something that resonates with you, let us know. But obviously tonight we have a really special group of teachers with us who all have had a depth of experience working with our youngest scholars in the K-2 space. So tonight we're going to be focusing on kind of those foundational skills and the data that comes in the early years. If you've joined us before, or if this is just your first time, we've had 2 other sessions. So the first session we looked at iLearn data and what the data is telling us, and teachers' reactions to how they're using and leveraging that data in the classroom. Our second session, we moved to the older scholars. And so we talked about the SAT, since the SAT is now a high school graduation exam. And so we took a look at how high schools are using that to inform instruction. And so today we're going to be kind of going all the way back to how we're educating our youngest folks to be ready for those types of assessments, and for us to make sure that we know how to best support them. So here's kind of our roadmap for this evening. We're really excited for this to be mostly a conversation, because we don't have a lot of standardized data on K-2 scholars. And so I'm most excited to hear from our panelists about how and what data they are tracking to know if our youngest scholars are on pace. So let's go ahead and jump into the conversation and get ourselves started. One thing that's really important for us to name is that there's no one single assessment that's going to be the silver bullet and tell us everything that we should know about a student. But what we do know is that data gives us a great starting place to know where a scholar is and how to move them forward, and whether our practices are being successful. It gives us a lot of information on what to keep, what to change. And I also want to say to all the educators watching, we know that you are working extremely, extremely hard. And so the other thing that we like to name in this series is we want to hear what's working so that other teachers can maybe borrow some of those best practices and use them in their own classroom. So with that, I'm going to kind of toss things over with just some open questions. And again, at the end, we'll hold some space for Q&A. So let's transition to that first set of questions. And let's just start with data, because for some of us, we may not know what data is in the K-2 space. So I'm going to start with you, Tina. First and foremost, with our youngest scholars, can you talk to us just a little bit about, like, why is looking at K-2 data important in the first place?
Yeah, sure. I always use the analogy for teachers and parents that kindergarten, first and second grade they're our foundation. It's like building a house. When you build a house, you don't start with the walls. You have to start with the foundation. And if you don't have that strong foundation, then you have nothing to support your walls and they're going to fall down. So we have to have a way to know if our foundation is strong. So you have to have ways to keep a pulse on where the scholars are in kindergarten, first and second grade, to ensure that there are no cracks in that foundation, so that when they're getting to third, fourth, and fifth grade and starting to build those walls, that they're gonna stay sturdy.
And to build off of Tina, I think when you're thinking about, like, those cracks in those walls, or determining if that happens, data is so important for kindergarten through second grade, because we really see data as like a temperature check to see what's going well, what are the error trends that we're seeing, and then how can we close those gaps within our instruction so that we can get scholars on pace for learning.
That's really helpful. And Tina, I think it's like a really visible kind of analogy for us to be looking at this evening. I think that's just really, really helpful. I'm really curious, the second question of just like, what types of data can you capture? I've been in a kindergarten classroom and there's just so much going on. I was a high school teacher, so I'll just name that. There's so much going on. And so I'm always really curious, just what types of data are you looking at and able to measure in those K-2 grades? And maybe Chrissy, we'll start with you. And Lydia, I'd love to hear also from your kindergarten classroom that I'm sure was far more like better managed than maybe perhaps the one that I was in that was a little bit more chaotic.
Well, one assessment that we use is M-Class Dibbles, and that does a really great job of collecting data on foundational literacy skills. So we assess our scholars 3 times a year for benchmark assessments. And then we also progress monitor our scholars on a 3-week cycle, depending upon their proficiency level. And we also collect weekly assessment data, which is embedded within our foundation's curriculum. We also analyze data weekly with data meetings, and then also collecting phonemic awareness data using our screener with our embedded screeners from our integrity curriculum. And this really helps to just identify any scholars who are struggling with phonemic awareness, and then what skills that they need to continue to develop. So we really use data like those 3 points of the year, but then also like little touch points to really see, is our instruction effective? And if not, like, what can we do?
To build on that, I feel like we do a lot of the same things, making sure that scholars have that phonemic awareness knowledge, they have the phonics awareness knowledge. Can they manipulate a word? Can they turn bat to cat and then turn it to mat and then turn it to mag and then switch it back to zap and manipulate it that way? I feel like for kindergarten specifically, though, with talking about the foundations, it's a constant checking in weekly, maybe even twice a week, the Wednesday, the Friday, like a midweek check-in. How are we doing? Are we going to be able to make that Friday check-in? How are we feeling? Are we getting it? Are there some gaps? So definitely we do the benchmarks, we do the testing 3 times a year, but those weekly tests are really what's giving those scholars a strong start, because the more practice they have, the more kind of comfortability they have with it. Because unfortunately, there's one thing that's always going to be happening in schools, and that's assessments. Also making sure that they understand, though, this is an assessment, but I just want to see what you know. It's nothing. We're gonna chill out for a little bit, but we want to make sure that you are still on track. So making sure that we're keeping track of those foundations. And when it comes to the math skills, like, do you know these numbers? Can you manipulate these numbers? I mean, all of these assessments is really about that manipulation. Do they truly understand it, or are they just memorizing?
That's helpful. Chrissy, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit because we had a conversation kind of prepping for this, and you talked to us a little bit about the data you capture even in the lunchroom. Can you share a little bit about that story that you shared that I think is just really powerful?
Yeah, so we collect phonemic segmentation data as a part of our progress monitoring with our kindergartners. And we were noticing that many of our scholars were having a hard time being able to segment that initial sound. And so if it's like bat, and they were supposed to segment the whole word, they were having a hard time with even just being able to start with B. And so from there, we decided, okay, well, we're going to reteach the skill, and we're going to really, really focus on beginning sounds. And then as a part of our kind of check-in during breakfast, during lunch, is when classroom teachers, myself, would be able to just do like a 1-word assessment with kiddos of like, the word is cat. What's my beginning sound? And see if everything that we've done in our reteaching and all of our activities that we've done to close that gap, did it work? And so those are some of the just like the most important assessments, just like what Lydia was talking about, like those small touch points that you can gather quick data to see, is your instruction effective? So it doesn't have to be this long, big assessment 3 times a year. Some of the most important is those little times.
Thank you so much for that. I just appreciate hearing that it's that nice balance between what Lydia and Chrissy, that it doesn't have to be that big sit down assessment. It can be just a quick interaction that gives you so much information on where a scholar is at any given moment. So I think that's a really nice transition into this third question of like, how do you use this data to gauge readiness, right? We spent some time talking about 3 through 8 in our first session. So like, how are you then pulling all this data together to assess whether students are ready, in particular for that 3rd through 8th iLearn? Maybe Lydia, we'll start with you, but curious what everyone is kind of thinking about.
I feel like I'm in a special spot where I now teach 3rd grade from teaching K through 2. And so I kind of use this data a lot in my classroom. I use it definitely for intervention purposes, though, just to see, like, I know where scholars need to be at the end of the year for 3rd grade to be successful for the rest of their life. And I know based off of all the data that we've collected from the scholars from their time in kindergarten and now, where they kind of fall, or where those gaps, or not, sometimes it's not even gaps. Gaps means that you taught it, but they just didn't get it. This is lost. They unfortunately, especially for these 3rd graders right now, who were kindergartners right when the pandemic happened, they never got it. So this is a learning loss. This is definitely something that was never taught to them. Therefore, these are things that we have to go back and kind of do. So I definitely use that as an intervention where it's like, yes, you'll be able to get here. There's no problem with that. I just need to see right now where it is that those loss or those gaps are happening so that we can kind of fill them in as necessary.
Tina or Chrissy, anything to add to this one, in particular, thinking about your role of coaching teachers too around like assessing readiness?
I I think when we're thinking about readiness for third grade and thinking about our little ones, it's super important to really be focusing on like that word recognition and that phonemic awareness, and making sure that those are really, really solid, and building that automaticity to fluency as well. And so when we're thinking about our reading blocks and just making sure our scholars able to read, and are they able to read fluently and automatically, those collecting data early on in those lower grades is super important, so that we can make sure they're continuing to learn and being able to develop vocabulary and comprehension in those lower grades, but really making sure that they have those foundational skills that are going to prepare them to have access when they get into third grade iLearn.
That's really helpful. And I think we're actually kind of tiptoeing on that fourth question too, of like how do we strike that right balance of relying on just like pure assessments, right? And also these other measures of readiness. So any kind of final words on this one, Tina, that you're kind of thinking about?
Yeah, so I think there seems to be just what I have encountered in coaching teachers and things is there's this misconception that testing, testing is like you don't say this too much, like, kids are tested too much. We're assessing them all the time. They're not being kids, but there's this misconception that giving assessments is like, oh, this has to happen every Friday, or I have to assess every month. And then nothing, in a lot of places I've been, nothing's happening with that data. We're doing it because that's what we're supposed to do. And so there's this misconception that it's something extra that has to happen, when really this is the work that drives our instruction. And in reality, like Chrissy was talking about before, it's happening all the time. If I ask a student to read a word before they enter my classroom in the morning after I've graded them, I'm doing an assessment. If when they leave, I say, okay, I'm going to give you a word, you're going to tap it out. The lunchroom thing, it's happening all the time. And we learn as we become veteran teachers just how to like store that in our brain constantly. Like we're walking down the hall. Oh, I know that this child is really, really struggling with beginning sound. If I can get them 5 words from here to there, I'm giving them more at bats. And so I think we need to stop viewing assessments as something that's paper pencil that happens at the end of every week or happens at the end of a unit, and just it is what we're doing constantly to drive our instruction. It's how we make our adjustments in our data to ensure that our kids are getting that really strong foundation and closing, filling in their cracks, and so that then they're ready to build their walls. But I think learning that it takes a school that is data driven and teaches teachers how to look at the data and what that means for their instruction, and supports them in that, to where it just becomes automatic. And it's not, we're giving an assessment today, it's just happening.
Well, that's really, really helpful. I want to acknowledge that we've got some excellent questions coming in the chat. And I will frame in particular for just the panelists, so you guys can be thinking. A lot of them are around parents and resources and how we're equipping families to understand data, especially for our youngest scholars. Are not the next slide, but this slide after that, we're going to actually talk about some of the ways in which we're equipping families and parents. But just wanted to put that out there. Thank you so much for the questions, and we promise we're going to get to them here in just a second. So we spent some time talking about the types of data and kind of that striking that balance. I love, Tina, that you brought up also not just collecting data for data's sake. If we have a bunch of numbers and then we're not doing anything with it, that doesn't really help us. It just becomes overwhelming. So we've got a couple of questions though, bigger picture implications that I'm just really curious to get your feedback on our next slide. So one of them is just would you see value in having a K-2 standardized assessment? What would be the pros and the cons to this? Acknowledging this is just a hypothetical. There's nothing out there. There's no loaded, there's nothing loaded about this question. Just like super curious from your expertise if you would see value in this space. So I'll throw this open. Maybe Tina, I'll start with you, and then Lydia, curious your thoughts on this one too.
Personally, my personal opinion is I don't see value in having a standardized assessment in K-2 because, like I said, when you're building that foundation, like we are just doing in the moment assessing all the time. I think there's also this trickiness of the standardized testing is happening on computers. Kindergartners, for them, when they're growing up in an age where their technology is touchscreen, and teaching them to use a computer is a skill in itself. And so I feel like it comes down to, it's really about, are they able to use the technology, and they're less focused on the questions. I think too, a lot of our work in K1, and it starts to balance out in second grade, but it's all oral, and it's one-on-one, or it's walking around constantly and being able to have a conversation with a student. And I think that is just really, I just wouldn't feel right about assessing a student's progress in building their foundation based off a standardized assessment. However, I do personally feel that I-read should be an end of year second grade standardized test. And I'll just say that.
I agree with Tina when it comes to definitely the cons of doing a standardized test for K-2. It's a lot of extra work on the backhand. Can the students do it? Absolutely. It's just, like she was saying, especially with the laptops thing and technology, and we kind of see it now with some of the tests that we take from my school with NWEA. The scholars really, yes, they have technology at home. The type of technology that we use at school, though, with the drag and drop, not necessarily something that they have access to at the house. And so I feel, yes, there would just be a lot of more work that would need to be done on the back end of that would cause a lot more complication. What are we actually testing the scholars on? I think another pro of it could be that because the T word is such a bad word, it kind of relieves a lot of that anxiety and stress for scholars, because at this point they're used to it. They know what to expect. They know kind of what they're doing. So there's some, I guess, relief and consistency. That's a big but. It's not an and. It's definitely a big but. If it's something that, is something that people are wanting to see, then definitely making sure that if that's the case, there needs to be some sort of kind of like a red flag at the beginning, like do not make your child anxious, because that would just carry on with them for the rest of their life. So there would need to definitely be some sort of balance where it's like, yes, you test until you are out of school, but like, it's honestly just, we're trying to see where you are. How can we best help you and support you as a scholar? It's not to say like, oh, you didn't pass this test, so you're not moving on. No. Don't get caught up in the semantics. Like, whatever you need, this is what that test is for. It's for the support. If you have to repeat the grade, you have to repeat the grade. You're getting that support that you need. So if that is something that people are wanting, then there needs to be that added benefit of letting people know that this is what it's for. This is what it is, and this is what it is not, kind of thing.
I appreciate that distinction too. And yes, to both of you, those were just your personal testimonies about what you think. We're not saying that we're going to roll out a K-2 assessment, but just always curious. I think both of you also brought up this point about like avoiding too much testing, right, in the early grades, and kind of where is that line? Chrissy, I'm curious at your school, like how do you, where is the line of too much testing, and how do you avoid it?
I think you first have to ask yourself before giving an assessment, what's the purpose? What is the purpose of your assessment? We have to be super intentional about the assessments that we're giving, as well as like the data that we're collecting. So you don't want to collect data for data's sake and then sit on that data for a while and then, oh, what are we going to do with it? You have to be very timely in your analysis, and just have to make sure that it's purposeful. And so anytime that we're giving an assessment, we're always thinking about, are we taking a temperature check of where the students are, and then how are we going to move forward so that we can continue to close any gaps that we see.
And you mentioned gaps here. So I'm going to move us to this third question. In our first teacher talk, we talked a lot about iLearn and just the gaps along, in particular, like lines of race and ethnicity, right? These achievement gaps that do exist. And I'm curious how your schools are, acknowledging, yes, there are achievement gaps that exist within standardized testing. So what are you all doing to kind of close those gaps in the K-2 or circumvent them from existing once they get to third grade?
I can start us off. Something that my school is doing in particular is definitely making our curriculum, trying our best to make our curriculum more engaging for scholars. And what that can look like for us specifically is, the scholars see themselves in the things that they are learning about, whether that be they see people of color, they see women, they see Black men, they see Latina, they see Latino, they see like all of the above is being represented, and representation is very much so key. And also, though, how do they see themselves in the community that they currently are living in? And that's something that was very important to our school, because engagement, yes, everyone can be engaging. We can make curriculum fun. We can make learning fun. But also, what else can we do for those scholars so that they're engaged in it on like a higher level?
And then Tina, talk to us a little bit about what Donnan is doing to really put some, measures in place to think about closing achievement gaps before we even get to that third grade assessment.
Yeah, so I think this is like our teachers are assessing and making adjustments. I think schools should do the same thing. And I know that that's happened at Donnan, even with this being my first year there. We have a lot of conversations about the changes that have happened, the things that have changed over the last 3 years. So one of those things was hiring me as a literacy specialist and doing intervention work based off of that data. I service kids grades K-6 to help close those gaps. And the data is showing, because even within my group, not only am I collecting in the moment data, and I have my anecdotal records constantly, but there are points in my lessons where after so many lessons, we're doing an assessment and seeing, are they should I be continuing with this, or do we need to back up? So I think a big thing was hiring a literacy specialist. And I think, I don't know if she mentioned this time, but like last year, Chrissy was doing some teaching, and this year she's able to support all of the teachers in these foundational skills. Sometimes she's going in and co-teaching alongside them. Sometimes it's just giving real-time feedback. We have 2 meetings a week just based around foundational skills, strengthening our skills, but also analyzing that data and making adjustments as a team. So I think our data is showing, I know our data is showing that we are making progress. And I just think that it's about the systems and procedures and the people that you're putting in place to help that, because a teacher cannot do it all on their own.
And I think
yeah, go ahead, Chrissy.
I think, Tina, to build off of what you were saying, is that just confronting those achievement gaps head on, acknowledging that they exist, and just like you said, really, really relying on those structures that we have. And so like our weekly data meetings, our practice clinics to teach teachers new instructional strategies, that real-time coaching is super, super important so that we can just continue to confront those achievement gaps and have those at the front of our mind each and every day.
Yeah, thanks for kind of grounding us in if we're not looking at the data, we won't know that the gaps exist, right? And so how do we make sure that we're analyzing that data? I am going to pop this question up before we transition, and that is the question of what is a weekly data meeting for parents and for teachers maybe that don't have those routinely. I think both of your schools do these. And so does somebody want to share a little bit about what is a weekly data meeting look like, and what's the purpose?
Yeah, I can start us off at our school. A weekly data meeting is where we all come together, kindergarten through third grade, foundational skills teachers, to look at our foundations assessment data, weekly data. And so teachers are inputting their data into a tracker, and then through that tracker, are really able to see like where did our scholars really excel that week, and then where is like the big gap or the error trend that they're seeing. And so after that takes place, we then go right into our lessons for the very next week to then think about where are we going to address that error trend. Is that something where I'm going to reteach a skill because 70% of our kids did not get it, and so I need to reteach? Or is this something that that Joseph is really, really struggling with, and so I'm going to make sure that I call on him and that I check in with him during the dictation part of our lesson. And so really, really making sure that we're being responsive to the data, and then for the next Friday, going back and seeing, did the kiddos, did they close that gap that I named the previous week?
Anyone have anything to add? It was such a nice summary, Chrissy, of how we hope that data meetings are operating. I think the other thing that I heard in your, maybe you weren't explicit, but I heard is that everyone's participating, right? Like all the teachers are bringing the data. It's not just admin, right, that are facilitating, but really it seems like it's everyone analyzing the data. So it's not a gotcha. But kind of is that an accurate assessment?
Yes, it's every single person that is on our team. So it's our classroom teachers, it's our ELL coordinator, it's our ACT special education teacher, it's our IAs, Tina, our interventionist. Like everyone is there, and I think with this group dynamic, really, like, you're excited to see your data, and you're excited to see, did Rebecca close that gap from last week, and did this student, did they increase their proficiency, and now they're not on the cusp, but they met that 80% proficiency. And so it's a really exciting time, and it's very collaborative because we often are shouting out our kids as we're analyzing data. And so I know I look forward to it, and I know our teachers looked forward to it every Friday as well.
Thank you for sharing that. So I think what's really exciting is now we know how teachers are sharing the data and how teachers are reacting. Now we're going to change to we're going to start to wrap up our conversation and look at the parent and family involvement around K-2 data. So, with our last set of questions. Let me also do this. Let me plug this. We are going to move to a Q&A based on questions from the chat. So if you have a question, I would encourage you to put that in the chat. Now that we're moving to our last slide of planned questions, we'll be ready to take your questions here in just a moment. So Tina, I'm going to start with you on how do you help students and families understand the data about their students, especially their young students? I know Chrissy just explained how we explain it to teachers, but how do you do this with students directly and also with families?
Well, I'll start with the students. We're very honest with our students. We let them know, like, this is where you were the last time we did this, and this is where you are now. And we celebrate that. We provide them feedback on what they did really well and how they can be better the next time. So I think just being honest with students, even if it's hard for them to hear, and just celebrating every little win with them. And to add to that, like, that even goes with families. Like, that student grew 25% from last week, and just shooting their parent a message, or having a quick phone call, or in the car rider line, because I'm out there a lot. It's easy when I'm putting a kid in the car just to say, oh my gosh, they did so great today. But I think also we utilize our parent-teacher conferences to really dive into that and explain what that means. I'm always available, just not being a classroom teacher, I don't have a homeroom with scheduled meetings, but I'm available for parents to come and ask questions. I do have certain ones that I want to sit in on and just have a little more in-depth conversation. But at Donnan, I'm also responsible for all of our dyslexia screenings and that whole procedure that is required by the IDOE, and our DIBLs, which is our universal screener, flags for us kids that could be at risk for dyslexia. And so then I'm communicating with families to get permissions to do those level 1 screeners. And sometimes that I start with a letter, but sometimes then it needs to go to a phone call, because that can be really hard for families, and they don't understand. They're not sure, like, are you trying to get my kid evaluated for an IEP? And just kind of bring down, like, nothing that we're doing is bad. It's about helping your child fill these gaps and be the best student that they can be, because kids are very frustrated when they cannot access the material in class. So whether it's letters or text messages or face-to-face conversations or phone calls, just doing whatever we can to put families at ease when we're asking for difficult things. I'm also leading our iRead preparation, our iRead 3 preparation for our 3rd grade. So our teachers have been doing practice clinics every day, and we're just kind of like, we just continually like letting parents know it's coming. We're going to be actually having a parent night coming up soon to talk about what their child can expect for iRead 3, and just what it does, and why we are using this assessment and how we use it. But I think it's just a lot of conversation, and you have to gauge. For some families, they do just want a letter, and they're perfectly fine with that. But others, they want to sit down and they want to ask questions, and we just have to be willing to do that.
Lydia, I'm curious how your school is approaching kind of that family piece also, of how are we helping families understand this data?
I think for my school, that for families specifically, we are really big on, as much as possible, contacting those families for the good, bad, and the ugly, and everywhere in between, only because you build that relationship with them where they're comfortable, where they feel as though whatever you are doing, I know for a fact, just based off of the previous conversations, that you are doing it for the betterment of my student. And letting them know that it's a team effort. They call the shots. We're kind of here on the back line. You were their first teacher. We can use each other. Whatever I can do at school to help further him, whatever you can do at home to help further him, just let us know, and we can help going that way. I think the transparency, though, aspect that Tina was kind of talking about, but the students can also work for the families as well, where it's like, this is where your child is. This is where he needs to be, or where they need to be. This is what I'm going to do in the classroom, and to make sure in the school building that he can be successful. This is what I kind of need from you, and whatever supports that I can do to help you meet that goal for the scholar, your child, let me know. And I think that's really a big part, where that relationship piece. Yes, I'm a teacher. They have to trust me either way. They're not really sure. I'm the one in the classroom 8 hours a day, so I can say whatever, and they'd be like, yeah, okay, cool. And then that's not really how it's going to work. If we really want to make a difference for the scholar, we have to make sure that we come together. You like my hand gestures? You can tell I've been teaching today. We really have to come together as a team and really focus on what's best for the student. And so in order to have that happen, for it to be a team, I can't be the mover and groover. It's not about me. I have a job. The family has a job. That scholars are in their success is really that main goal. And so being able to build those relationships, to have those difficult conversations, are going to be very, very important, because sometimes I don't fully understand the data. And so being able to sit down and talk and really do you have any questions, writing those questions down. I'm not afraid I don't know about anybody else. I'm not afraid to say, like, I'm not really sure about your question. I'm going to write it down and see if I can get the answer for you, because that's also something that I'm kind of confused about, and I want to make sure that I do it correctly or give you the right response. So that kind of stuff.
I think all of you did such a good job of hitting on like the parent and family as a resource, and also alluded to like we're all a big team. So I'm also curious about community partners that you're able to pull in to leverage to support scholars as well. Chrissy, I think you have one that you wanted to share with the group of just a community ally that you all are leveraging at Emma Donnan.
Yes. So last year, we just noticed that our first graders, who are now second graders, were really, really hit hard by pandemic learning loss. And we're really like those kiddos that were learning sounds virtually. And so it was really challenging. And so we wanted to be able to provide some support to them. And Ignite Reading is a one-on-one online tutoring service that focuses on foundational literacy skills and is grounded in the science of reading. I don't know. We are very, very, very big supporters of the science of reading at my school. And Ignite does a great job of using that research to really drive how they provide instruction to their students. And so they've done amazing things with our scholars, and we've seen huge, huge gains for this group of second graders who were really struggling at the beginning of the year, and is now just like really, really taking off. And we're adding a few more students come in a few weeks as well. So definitely look up Ignite Reading. They're amazing.
Thanks for that resource. We just dropped that in the chat too, those of you that are online with us. I would also be remiss if I didn't, since you brought up tutoring, also plug the Indiana Learns tutoring opportunity that is available to families. I just want to make sure that people know about that opportunity as well, where families can access tutors for slightly older kiddos. But we want to make sure that that is also an opportunity that families are taking advantage of, so we can leave a message here in the chat with that resource. And then I am going to pop this one up before we transition. We heard about the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated will be partnering with Adelante. Does somebody want to share a little bit more about that?
Yes, this is really exciting. Our elementary principal, Ms. Randall, and I have been working closely to start to onboard some volunteers to work with some scholars once a week. And they're going to be able to work on their fluency skills, be able to work on word recognition, play some games. And so we're really, really excited to be partnering with them.
It truly takes a whole community, right? A whole village, whether that's one-on-one tutoring or a great organization like this one. It's exciting to see all of the folks that are coming together to support our students. So again, before we transition to a couple more questions, I'm going to let you all share what is one tool, resource, or support that you might recommend for teachers that are interested in better leveraging data to inform their instruction. So I'm just going to throw it open to whoever would like to start.
I can start because I was bad and I did not follow the directions, and I was definitely told to put resources and I just didn't. So I'll start because I was not following directions. My bad. Something that I used though a lot in my very first year of teaching, and this is going to sound really, really funny, but Sheets, Excel. If you are someone that's starting off with collecting and grabbing data, that's definitely, and also I love that I say data and everyone else says data, it's fine. But if you are someone that is starting off on your data journey and you need a way to collect it and kind of see where the scholars are based off of the standard, which is how I did it, or the specific skill or the specific objective for whatever lesson or unit, whatever it might be, using that was very helpful, because having it highlighted red or yellow or green for me to see like, oh, where are we struggling? Oh, that, okay, we're not really sure about this. Let me go back and see where that gap lies. So Google Sheets and Excel, 10 out of 10.
Tina, do you have a great resource for
Chrissy.
us? Or Chrissy?
Yeah, I had one. I think Chrissy goes first, and then I'll do mine.
Okay.
I don't know. Does she remember?
I do. So yeah, I would highly recommend just first and foremost setting aside a time in your schedule to analyze data. I think that oftentimes we think about giving the assessment, but never really spend the time and give ourselves that time to be able to sit and look through and analyze and then to plan for next steps. And so I think one recommendation just for teachers who are interested in getting started is just like, carving that space out in your schedule. Another resource is Driven by Data is a really, really great tool just to get teachers started and analyzing. And then one other thing I would say is I actually am in the midst of attending a training by Simplicity Education. And it's really, really helped me to be able to sit down and to be able to look at data across classrooms and across our school. And so I would highly recommend them as ways to be familiar with Google Sheets and things like that as well.
So building off of Chrissy's, analyzing the data is super important, and it is a large task that can be very overwhelming. So definitely this resource of Driven by Data, just like how to do that. But I think in connection with that, as Chrissy talked about earlier, are those data meetings, those weekly data meetings, where you are able to say, okay, well, I looked at the data, but now what? What am I doing with this? How am I using it to help my kids? So I think that those data meetings are super important. So if you're in a school that is not using them, I would start asking questions and see, like, is this something that we can do? Or try, get together with a couple of your teacher friends and do it together. And a great resource, if you're new to data meetings, Leverage Leadership has a great section on what the weekly data meeting is and the steps for getting into that. So that would be my resource and advice.
Thank you all. And a huge thanks to my colleague, Mark, who's behind the scenes frantically dropping all of these awesome resources into the chat. So again, if you're joining us, we will have these available for you as well. So I want to transition. We have time for 2 questions, and I think these are really good ones. So here's our first question. And again, this is open to anyone in the group. How can parents assess readiness? So how are we equipping parents to be able to assess readiness? Or maybe what should parents be looking for to be able to assess readiness? That might also be kind of a secondary question, is what should parents be looking for?
I can kind of start off. I'm still kind of processing the question. I think when I was teaching kindergarten and first grade, how with parents wanting to be involved, it was very difficult for me in the beginning to try to figure out what best to make them involved, because there's a way in which that we teach the scholars. How can we bring that to them at home? And so I feel as though how I started off was we were learning letter names and sounds. So I gave the families cards that they can take home. They had to cut them out, but I gave them access to like the letter names where it's like the capital letter on the back, lowercase letter on the other side, and like gave them instructions on how to get with their scholar to learn them. And then the same thing with the numbers, they had the flashcards, the number 1 on the other side, it was like 1 dot on it. So I feel like for families in the beginning grades, how to assess their child's readiness at home is definitely like reaching out to your scholar's teacher and asking them what is something that they're working on in class, or what is one thing that my scholar is currently having a challenge in that I can help with them at home.
I would also say just like observing and noticing conversations that you have with your child, and so thinking about like language, thinking about vocabulary, and the questions that they ask, the conversations that you have around books, and this can be even something that you're doing as they're starting to develop language, and so like those pre-K early skills that you're wanting to really develop. And if you're noticing that um, you that you may think that the language is not where you want it to be, or you want to develop that language, just simply like starting to read, also like just having those conversations with students just to build that vocabulary, I think is super important.
I definitely agree with Chrissy. I think sometimes parents may panic and become overwhelmed with um, preparing their child for school. And it really is just having conversations with them, making sure allowing them to talk and you listen and asking them questions, but just conversation, um, reading reading to them, asking them questions about the book or the picture, just like natural engagement with them does so much. And I know that for some parents that seems like, but I'm not teaching them anything, I'm not helping them do anything. You're doing a ton just by having conversations and reading with them.
Thank you all for your words of advice to parents on that one. And then we're going to wrap up today with this final question, which is, what is the call to action our community needs to support our youngest learners? So what's kind of the call to action that you would have for the community that's watching today?
I think something I always think about, and I know this was mentioned a little bit before, but every minute matters. And so I feel like each of us has said something that really centers on every minute matters. And so like constantly having those conversations with our youngest learners to build that language skill. If we're walking in the hallway and we know that this student is working on this letter name and sound, like we're practicing it. But so thinking about like ways in which we can be able to meet students' needs every minute of the day. And then also thinking about how our entire school community is able to support in that initiative as well.
I think when I hear this question, I think not just our school community, but like um, outside of school. And I think what's really important to understand is that teachers are human and one person cannot do it on their own. And we need help. Parents can't do it on their own. And just like Lydia said, where parents and teachers have to come together to support their scholars, we need our community to come together. One of the things that we talk to I always say that I am preparing students to be a part of society. And community is a big part of that. And we would want them giving back to their community. And so I would say for anybody that work or lives near a school in a neighborhood or something, and you're wondering, how can I help? Like, just reach out to the school. There are so many things. And you might say, but I don't know how to teach them. We don't need you to do that. We can set you up to read a book to a child, to have a conversation with a child. So I just think that what has to be recognized from the community is that schools and teachers and parents need your support and your help. So if you feel the call, contact a school near you.
one of the values, or I guess phrases that is used a lot in my school, is it takes a village. And that is 100% true when it comes to the child's education, because they are going to be in society, just like Tina said. We're creating future citizens of the United States of America, wherever it is that they go. We are creating those citizens to be in society and to work well and merge and be little freedom fighters whenever they need to be in the society. And so that can't happen without help from others. And no, not everyone's going to be a teacher, but you all can give your time in some aspect. You all have great careers that you can definitely share with students, because I cannot tell you how many scholars want to be doctors and lawyers, and those are the only two careers that they're aware of. And so knowing that, giving them access to the opportunity to learn something more or something different is going to be a huge, huge asset for these scholars, because like I said, like everyone has wonderful careers that you can come in and just share and give those scholars access to something different. You can give your time. I would love someone to come in my classroom and kind of help out. I mean, they're great kids. You know, you can just sit in and chit chat with them. They're wonderful people. And so sometimes it's not all about being in front of them and teaching. It's just honestly just showing up and giving your time. It's not a call to action. It's honestly just show up. That's what we do every day. And, you know, you can do it too.
I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists. And as we transition, we're going to put up some more resources that this great group has provided us. And I'm also going to throw up their social media handles one more time. It sounded to me like they just invited us, community, into their schools. And so I think it would be awesome for us to reach back and take that on. So this is, again, Allegiant Prep and then also Adelante Schools. So on the next slide, in addition to all the great resources that the team mentioned, we've got a couple of more that we're going to drop into the chat for you. And if there is a question that didn't get answered tonight, you also have an email for us at Teach Indy now, so that we can field that question or make connections over to our amazing panelists. I want to close out by just inviting you to join us for our next conversation. So the next one is coming up in March. And in March, we're going to spend our time back on a Tuesday digging into special education data to look at this group of scholars in particular across the 3rd through 8th I-Learn data, and really dig into how we're supporting students that are identified for special education that are maybe needing additional supports to have success. So just wanted to plug that. Additionally, I want to share that we have a conference coming up for Teach Indy next Saturday. And actually, our panelist, Chrissy, Franz, and her amazing team will be presenting at the conference. And so wanted to make sure that if you're a teacher out there and you are free next Saturday, that you join us on Saturday, the 25th at Butler University. And if you're interested in registering, all that information is on your screen. So once again, on behalf of the whole panelists, I want to say a huge thank you and thanks for joining us. Thanks for the great questions, and keep them coming. We'll see you in March. Thank you.